welcome everyone to session 5 of this year's virtual edition of Tackling Insurgent Ideologies. Yesterday our focus was on global trends, what was happening on the extremist landscape against the backdrop of a pandemic. We talked about where groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda were. We also talked about the advent and the rise of far-right extreme individuals, maybe not operating as organized groups, but the post-organizational landscape of extremism that we're finding ourselves in globally. Today our attention, of course, has turned home. Samir Saran, ORF's president, just concluded a conversation with Ram Madhav on India's extremist challenges, and I'm going to hand over to our moderator and my old friend and colleague Barkha Dutt now for a conversation on Kashmir and the challenges of what Kashmir has faced. It's not simply coincidence that we're doing this discussion on the 1-year anniversary of the dilution of Article 370. What has changed in that time? Joining Barkha on the panel, we have quite a few names. Valuable. Professor Amitabh Mattu of JNU is joining us. Ashima Kaul, who works in the counter-radicalization space in Jammu. Senior police officer from the state, Sandeep Chaudhary, and of course Tanveer Sadiq, National Conference leader, former advisor to Omar Abdullah and spokesperson of the party. He himself has just emerged a short while ago from over 6.5 months in detention after last August's political developments. So Barkha, without further ado, there's a lot to talk about today. So I'm gonna hand over to you with that.
Thank you so much, Maya, and hello everyone. First, I'm only going to mention my geography because I think somewhere it is relevant to the larger discussion, because whatever the Modi government does is not without a plan, is not without a strategy, and is not without some messaging, overt or subliminal. This afternoon, I'm in Ayodhya, where the Bhumi Pujan of the Ram Mandir is about to take place shortly in the presence of the Prime Minister. And this is also the very day which marks the 1 year of the abrogation of Article 370. Is there a correction? Should we be joining the dots between both of these dates falling, as it were, in the same time frame? That is something to also think about. I also mentioned my location because in case my signal is a bit wobbly, I'm out on the road and Maya will be there to step in for me if I were to suddenly vanish from your screens, but I hope that does not happen. One more thing is that we welcome your questions. You will see a message box on your screen for all of our audience who have tuned in to watch and take part in this very important very important conversations. We have kept time aside specially for your questions. So do not forget that you can type in your questions on a message box that you will see on your screen, and we will be going through and sifting through some of those questions. So do keep them coming. Maya's already introduced our panel, so I won't spend more time on that. Thank you very much, everybody, really representing the spectrum, as it were, of viewpoints on this. Let me start, if I may, with Sandeep Chaudhary. Sandeep, I start with you because there's a police officer on the ground. The one question that will be asked again and again: did the abrogation of Article 370 actually make any concrete difference to your life? And if it did, was it for the better or was it for the worse? Now, in a typical situation, if there weren't as tight a clamp on, let's say, 4G services, or in terms of the sort of curfew or the movement restrictions that we saw in the beginning, you may have seen street protests. But the initial period had a very, very strict clampdown, and we haven't seen the kind of eruption that we are used to in the Kashmir Valley, at least. In real terms, in terms of policing, what is this year meant for?
My career in Kashmir Valley started coincidentally with the incident of Burhan Wani's death and then the agitation that followed it. I've been working in Valley since then. So, as compared to 2016, the thing that happened last year, they cannot be compared, because after Burhan Wani, there was a sudden emotional outburst and nobody knew this is going to happen. This time, everybody had an idea. We were prepared. Even people were prepared to a certain extent that something is going to happen. So, as far as street eruption is concerned, it was not going to happen the way it happened after Burhan's death, because at that time, nobody knew this is going to happen. And second thing, the difference that I have on the ground. As I told, I've been working here since 2016. The recruitment to terrorist ranks is the lowest in last 5 years this year. I have seen a certain trend in Russia that people have been saying militants are getting killed, terrorists are getting killed, so terrorism is increasing. But they forget the barometer for assessing terrorism is the local recruitment, which has gone down. If local recruitment goes up, then I will say terrorism has increased. This year, the downfall from recruitment last year is almost 60. 60 boys, lesser in number, have joined terrorism this year.
I remember being on the ground. Sandeep, can you hear me? Yeah. I remember being on the ground in the valley after the elimination of Burhan Wani, and one of the immediate fallouts was a surge in local militancy. Now, you're making this very important and significant point that you have not just not seen the surge, you have seen a downward trend. How do you explain this?
As far as terrorism is concerned, the recruitment has gone down. It was a trend. 2016 was the peak. 2016, after Burhan's death, people started joining terrorism in greater numbers. But 2018, we saw the peak of recruitment. That was more than 200 boys from Valley joined terrorism that year. 2018 was the peak. 2019, the numbers got slightly lesser than that. 2020 has been, as far as this terrorism recruitment scene is concerned, is that tipping point for people like me who are working here. Every district we had like 30 boys joining every year. This year, for example, in Anantnag, we have had only 6 boys joining terrorism, these terrorist organizations of various kinds. Last year, yeah.
So you've given us something, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you've given us something very important to talk about, because the anticipation, Tanveer Sadiq, if I can take this to you, is that while everybody used to agree that 370, having been whittled away by successive governments at the center over the years, was more symbolic than real, there was a sense that Kashmir was like a pressure cooker, that if you remove the lid, it would not simmer, but it would boil over. And the measure of that, usually in the valley at least, is a surge in local militancy. Now, you have Sandeep telling us that has not happened. That has not happened. Now, one of the paradoxes of what's happened is that the abrogation of 370 as an issue has actually hurt the mainstream more than it has hurt the separatists. If I were to offer an analysis as to why there is no direct correlation between increase in militancy and 370, that would be my analysis. My suggestion would be this is an issue that impacts the mainstream politician of Jammu and Kashmir way more than it does the separatist or the militant, because the separatist and the militant is anyway not accepting our constitution.
See, Barkha, I mean, I don't know. I mean, Sandeep has his point of view, but if my reports are to be heard, I think if we see right from last year, 2019, there have been close to around 135 terrorist incidents. And in the first half of 2020, 80 incidents of terrorists. And what is really surprising is that the majority of them are local Kashmiris who have been killed in these incidents. So I for once, I would be the happiest if militancy would end in Kashmir. But you know, the main thing that Article 370 did was that we as mainstream lost the argument that the interests of J&K and the people are safe with only in a democratic, vibrant India. Because we worked as a pressure valve where there would be incidents and then we would go out. There have been incidents, whether it was 2014, 15, 13, where things had come to normal. I mean, people were really enjoying it. There were many tourists coming back to Kashmir. So we were working as pressure valve. Suddenly, what you did is you marginalized even the mainstream, because our political workers have been killed. My house has been, let me give you an example of my own. My house has been attacked by militant. How can I be a threat to the country when I was arrested? I was humiliated. I was the one helping people across my party. We lost thousands of people. So I believe, and let's imagine for once Article 370 you abrogated Article 370. What after that? Has there been any improvement in any field of life? You have 4 lakh people who have lost their jobs. I mean, everything is. I mean, even in the court, the government went and said, "Look, at the militancy has risen, so we can't restore the 4G." I mean, you can't have 2 yardsticks, one there and one here. You had every field of life, whether it is education, school, trade. There are close to around 40,000 crore loss. I mean, what have they benefited out of abrogating Article 370? Even today, I can't imagine that.
Okay, now here's the question. What has happened has happened. We all have very strong views on it. We have strong views on how it could have been handled, how it will play on the ground. But I think what matters more to this conversation is what happens next. Where do we go from here? What is going to be the issue on the ground? Is politics going to change as we know it? Just a reminder to everybody who's tuned in, below the webinar window is a message box. Please do write in your comments and your questions. This is for all of you who have something to say. There will be time allocated for your questions. So I'm just going to remind everybody to do that. I want to go to Amitabh now. Amitabh, the Chief Minister you once advised, Mehbooba Mufti, is among the mainstream leaders who is still not out. Many mainstream leaders are now out one by one. Tanveer among them, for example. There is a sense among watchers of Jammu and Kashmir that perhaps a Mehbooba Mufti will emerge as the new separatist. And the mainstream, in the meantime, will be directed or will find themselves talking about the restoration of statehood instead of Article 370. And to that extent, the BJP and the Modi government would have very smartly actually shifted the center of politics to exactly where they wanted to be. Because even the local BJP would want the statehood of Jammu and Kashmir possibly to be restored. So is it fair to say that Article 370 has vanished as a mainstream issue, and perhaps it will be left to the Mehbooba Mufti a sort of representative kind of politics to talk about 370? So 370 moves from the mainstream to the separatist camp, and the mainstream moves to the restoration of statehood as their central point.
Barkha, you should be the academic in JNU. I should be on the streets of Srinagar because you theorized on what are the possibilities now. But let me begin by saying that the next 12 months are probably going to be more consequential than the past 12 months. If what Sandeep Chaudhary is saying, it's got to sustain itself, then this period could demonstrate that violence itself was an aberration in Kashmir's politics. I mean, for all these years, Tanveer will recognize that when Kashmiris struggled or Kashmiris protested, it was through non-violent methods. So in some ways, violence, terrorism was the aberration. Is that there was a downward trend, and that this period over the last 12 months is not exceptional because of what the government of India did, but exceptional, but really part of a pattern that has emerged. The second is a question of statehood. I think you're absolutely right. Statehood is the commitment made in as many words by the Prime Minister and the Home Minister, and that's going to be the focal point. And as you pointed out, Article 370 had lost much of its potency. Psychologically, it still carried a huge amount of weight for the mainstream. But politics has to, in some ways, whether we like it or not, given that this is the state of India, given that this is the strongest government since Indira Gandhi, we have to think of politics beyond 370. Third, the mainstream, in some ways, has to reinvent itself. After all, much of the introspection that you have carried out, I have carried out, has blamed New Delhi, has blamed separatism, has blamed Pakistan. What about the mainstream? Wasn't the kind of politics of entitlement and victimhood that they practiced in Jammu and Kashmir made them disconnected from the politics in the rest of the country? If they had built coalitions which were strong enough within Parliament, within the mainstream of Indian public opinion, it wouldn't have been easy to discard it with the same. You couldn't have done this in Tamil Nadu. You can't do this in Orissa. But there was something about the mainstream which made it possible for New Delhi to declare it redundant for the time being. So,
2 points. Sorry, go ahead.
So I just said 3 points. I think you need to have what it's also demonstrated, despite my great faith in Sandeep Chaudhary and all the bureaucrats, is that bureaucracy will never deliver. Because in terms of development, no matter what the propaganda blitz that you may have, the fact is on the ground, you need democratic leaders who will be able to use the instruments of the bureaucracy to deliver. So you need a restoration of statehood, you need free and fair elections, you need people empowered. In fact, today I wrote about people from Kashmir who empowered India in Kashmir. And you need that new crop of leadership, including people like Tanveer Sadiq and Ashima and civil servants like Sandeep Chaudhary. But we need to now, as you said, relook and reimagine things.
Now, the very interesting point that you made was the loss of credibility for the mainstream. Why could this not have been done in another state of India? One, because of course there was huge support, Amitabh, that the BJP was able to build up for the abrogation in the rest of India because of the Pakistan overhang, right? So when you say that this is a place where there's been militancy, there's been terrorism, there's an adversary interfering, but you're absolutely right. The fact is that on the ground after the abrogation of 370, while many of us unequivocally condemned the detention and the arrest of mainstream leaders, and I continue to believe that it was wrong, there was no street sentiment that was sympathetic. There was nobody coming out and saying, why did this happen, right? And this question, I'm just going to actually weave in some questions as they relate thematically that I think keeps it more interactive. This is exactly the question, Ashima, that Ratnadeep Chakravarti has, who says there's a constant suggestion that New Delhi should talk to leaders in the valley. But do the leaders who've been close to India, and by that he means mainstream leaders and not separatists, themselves have the trust of the common people? Do the encompass rational actors out there? And a related question from Shashank, it's often said that there was no elaborate opinion build-up in societal engagement as a prelude to the abrogation of 370. But was such an engagement ever workable, given the history of so many impasses every time such a debate takes place with the population of the Kashmir Valley? Let me take that to Tanveer and Sandeep Chaudhary. I'm seeing more questions coming in. Please do keep your questions coming in. Sorry, I first want to take it to Ashima because we haven't actually gone to her yet. Ashima, this situation that we're looking at, kind of weakening marginalization of the mainstream, the shift, the pivoting to the statehood instead of the 370 issue. Do you think 370 is forever buried in the archive of India as an issue?
I didn't get the last part of you. I couldn't hear the question clearly.
Is 370 now buried in the archives of India as a political issue?
Kind of, but not really. See, the issue is 370 abrogation is seen now in the new 2 union territories, especially in Jammu Kashmir, in a very different way in Kashmir and a very different way in Jammu. The sentiments for abrogation of 370 are linked to the question of identity, are linked to the question of protection of land, culture, jobs, and the uncertainties and fears that it holds. So in that context, the young people that I work with do have similar fears, similar uncertainties, and similar issues of identity. But the way it manifests in Kashmir is very different from how it manifests in Jammu region with other communities. So I do see a particular constituency in Kashmir which wants to keep the issue of 370 alive as long as it can, linking it with the identity that something has been taken from us. So that perception still continues. There is another kind of set of fears in the Jammu region that what will happen now with domicile coming in. So what is the process? what I see is that while the 370 issue itself is not really making the way to us a year ago, the awareness about it, what to do about and what will happen next is still unclear. So what really 370 did was demolish the confusion and crisis that we held for the last 70 years about our identity. It kinds of now given us a clear path. Okay, this is the only path and this is where we have to go. Yet it leaves a lot of confusion about the future. So that really needs to be addressed. And people are not feeling participatory in the process. Young people are not feeling participatory in their own future. That needs to be addressed. So besides security perspective, we need to have a perspective which includes young people, the people so at the civil society level. So when we say democracy and mainstream, we need to kind of further fragment it into what do we mean by mainstream. There's a lot of developments which are happening at the PRI level, at urban local body level. So BTC elections and panchayat elections. So we need to also see who are the mainstream, and they were not empowered. So that process is also need to kind of strengthen in people. So what I'm trying to say is, besides the political and the military solution, we need to open up other channels now for people to feel participatory in the process.
Problem is that the dialogue around Jammu and Kashmir is so polarized that it is virtually impossible to have a sane conversation. This might count as one of the few that is still possible to hold in this country, and that's actually the collapse. There is no intra-dialogue possible without name calling. You're either a jingoist or you're an anti-national. There is no complexity left in this conversation that we're willing to address. So let's try, at least on this panel, to pick up some of those complex threads. So ask you, what is mainstream politics going to be about? Is the National Conference going to fight for the restoration of 370? Or is the National Conference going to talk about statehood and use domiciles as a way to assert the identity that was once associated with 370?
Barkha, I'll just make a couple of few points before I come to that point. I mean, if we can't close our eyes and see the mood of the valley, there's a sense of hurt, betrayal, and defiance amongst the people. I mean, the question that we all should ask ourselves is: did this fully integrate Kashmir with the rest of the country, or it has further widened the gap both politically and constitutionally? We need to ask this question again and again to get the mood of the people on the ground. If you're asking me what the mainstream politics would be after what happened in August 5 last year, I think it's a very difficult question, because you not only marginalized us, you made us a laughing stock amongst the people, because till yesterday we were telling people that, look here, we have to be a part of the vibrant country, and you have to believe that we are saved by Article 370, we are saved by our special status, and India will always protect it. But suddenly that has totally gone the other way around. Now today, I cannot go to the people, and I don't know what the mood of the people will be when I go to them and explain it to them. But as far as the mainstream politicians are concerned, I think we will fight. We have our petitions filed in the Supreme Court, and that is the highest lawmaking body in the country, and we will fight our case there. Unless and until that is not decided, it will be very difficult for us to come out. I mean, for example, even today, the Farooq Abdullah Sahab asked for a meeting, an all-party meeting. They were all put under house arrest, but the BJP can very gladly go and have a meeting and do a 15-day celebratory process. I mean, There has to be, you can't work like this. You have to give a chance to the people of Kashmir to at least see what has happened after August 5. And number two, and a very important point, what Article 370, which a lot of people don't talk, is that it was on a back burner, the Kashmir issue. Suddenly after August 5 last year, it has defreezed the whole Kashmir issue. You had in the Washington Post, New York Post, almost Guardian, every newspaper carrying it up front. You not only defreezed the Kashmir issue, but you also made Kashmir China a part of Kashmir issue, because you just had Pakistan and India issue. Now you have a China a part of it. So have you really benefited from what you did on August 5? That is a question that everybody in Delhi should ask themselves.
But
Just once again, Amitabh, I'm coming to you and Sandeep on this exactly, but there's a question coming in from the audience. Aishwarya, hasn't the abrogation of 370 and the clampdown only inflamed the separatist movement in Kashmir, defeating the entire purpose of apparent integration? I'll take that to you, Amitabh, and then to Sandeep. Here's the irony. If the mainstream has been marginalized, and maybe the fault is at least 50% theirs, as you suggested, the failure of alternative politics is the elephant that has to be called out in the room. The dominant narrative of muscular nationalism is working because there are takers from it, and the other side has failed to come up with a compelling narrative. That's actually what's happened. But if in the process it has strengthened the separatist instead of the mainstream, is the entire purpose lost? Amitabh and then Sandeep on the same question.
First of all, I think, I have a great deal of empathy with Tanveer and the mainstream political leadership. But it's sooner or later they have to confront this huge dilemma that this is a new government with a new approach. This doesn't believe in putting issues on the back burner. Now, there wasn't any compelling reason to build a Ram temple or to lay the foundations today. But you could have put it on the simmer and people would have forgotten about perhaps on the issue. This is a government which has decided to play politics completely differently from the kind of politics that was played out over the last 70 years. It's shocked many of us the manner in which they confront issues, something that we have to get used to it, particularly because there isn't a strong opposition. Now, you can either, in these circumstances, decide to either resist or try and challenge politics, democratic politics, through a different sort of narrative. It will take time. Tanveer Sadiq and the National Conference, frankly, is caught between a rock and a hard place because it recognizes there is a sentiment within its constituency which will not easily appreciate the fact of doing a U-turn. And yet, ultimately, they will have to, if they have to, not sacrifice their quest for political power on the altar of some moral principle, compromise with what is the reality today. Now, having said that, I think what is important for people like you and me, and for everyone else in the people in the government, for everyone in the government and in the media, is to try and see how there can be a process of healing and reconciliation, even when there are extreme positions. You've done it. You've gone out on a limb, Barkha. So has so many of us, Ashima, Sandeep, in their own ways, to try and accommodate differences even when it's not popular. So to try and find a middle ground between Jammu and Kashmir, between Pandits and Muslims, within New Delhi and Srinagar, that's our challenge. But you cannot take away from the democratically elected government and the decision it's taken, which has received the approval of Parliament.
But the problem is exactly this, that there are no takers for middle grounds in polarized environments. And right, so people like yourselves, me, Sandeep, Ashima, Tanveer, if we were to go into Jammu and Kashmir, we are not right enough for the right or left enough for the left. That is the truth of the matter. We are all under pressure, and the media has played its part in this. And in fact, I'd like Maya to comment on that as well. But I just want Sandeep to, as a police officer, someone in the administration, to comment on whether you feel there is a hardening of ideology among younger people. How do you see developments like Sayyid Ali Shah Gilani, the sort of Pakistani affiliated, poster boy, rather, octogenarian of separatism, walking out of the Hurriyat conference. Has the Hurriyat conference faded at this point into redundancy, into the same archives that Article 370 has? If there is to be a new mainstream, are you looking at a new changing separatist bloc as well? What's going on with that, Sandeep, in your assessment?
As a government servant, I will not go exactly into the politics of it, but
Yeah.
I'll go into the part of governance and rule of law. As far as this separatist ideology and everything is concerned, it is totally immaterial if there is nobody on the ground to hit the streets and indulge in protests or violent protests or something like that. So there is where the rule of law counts. In 16, I am someone who has taken stones on different parts of my body. 2019, 2020, 2018. I have been working in South Kashmir for these 3 consecutive years. There is one thing which is most important, that is imposing the rule of law in all fairness. Stone pelters and the people who bring them on roads have to be tackled as per the law. This thing, I must say, after abrogation of Article 370, we had a freer hand to deal with these things. We could put the instigators and stone pelters to task in a much better manner. This is one thing, but it is not a long-term solution. That is where whoever comes to rule this place, that is not my business. My business is whoever comes to rule this place should ensure the rule of law. The rule of law must be sustained. And second thing, which is most important on ground, far away from our discussions and big politics, that is how the street behaves. So for the street's behavior, one thing is very important, that is the quality of your governance. If you give good governance, if your governance is clean, your policing is clean, if there are no bribes being exchanged to release stone pelters or OGWs, the recruitment is going to come down, the hatred towards the system is going to come down, the hatred towards the police is going to come down. So in my 3 years here, I'll give you a small example. In Shopian, when I joined in 2018, there were 48 recruits in 1 year. Last year, when I was still there were only 19 boys who joined a militancy. This year, in Anantnag, we applied the same mechanism of community involvement and everything. There have been only 6 boys who joined various terrorist organizations, as compared to almost 3 dozen last year. So I have this firm belief in quality of your governance and rule of law. If you can ensure that, things are going to improve. As far as the who comes to rule, that is the political part that I will keep myself out of.
Absolutely fair enough. I didn't even mean to ask you about that, but the question was more about, how you're going to tackle new hardening on the street if that actually happens. Now, we have 2 audience questions, one from Brigadier Khanna. After the abrogation of 370, has the cross-border intrusion from Pakistan increased or decreased? What measures have been taken to ensure that local youth do not join any of the jihadi groups? I think Sandeep addressed that you're seeing a decline, and it's also about governance. So I'll move on to the next one. Question from Prithvi Iyer. Do you think the issue of issuing domicile certificates in conjunction with the revocation of 370 may instill fear of demographic change and increase chances of violent protest? Ashima, I'll let you take that. I want to bring Maya in. And Amitabh, if you have something to add to that. There is the whole, the BJP has delivered on its promise of 370. But the one promise that I think people are still waiting for is the return, the enabling environment for the return of pundits. Now, if you're on the ground in Jammu and Kashmir, people say that you can't even get people from Jammu to move to Kashmir. Leave alone pundits who were pushed into exile into other parts of the country to move back. I want to ask both you and Amitabh about this, and then bring Maya in. The pundit question, it's something we must tackle. It's one of the promises that no government has been able to deliver. Ashima, go ahead. Ashima?
Yeah. Responding to the benefits of 370 or what it has brought, if we look at it from equality perspective, we need to look at the narrative also from those who were denied the PRC for all these 70 years. So we should not miss upon the gender, the women who lost it because of them getting married outside Jammu Kashmir, Ladakh, and also the Valmikis, the West Pakistan refugees, and the Gorkhas. So all of these communities who are now getting their domicile certificate and have a identity, they have citizenship rights. Now coming to the Kashmiri Pandit question, yesterday I went to Ajay Pandita's home in Jammu, who was a sarpanch and recently killed. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear about what's really happening. The perpetrators have not been caught. The investigation we don't know anything about. So there is a lot of fear in the Kashmiri Pandit community after Ajay Pandita's killing, that if he went back and was trying to recreate his own space, his own constituency, he was an elected sarpanch and he was killed. So what about us? But there are many voices in the Jagti refugee camp who are elated, they feel in the new system, the way PRIs are now being formed, they will get their own counselors, they will get their own representation. That is what we have to now ensure, that when we talk about return of Kashmiri Pandits, we need to look at the narrative first and build on that narrative. Today, Kashmiri Pandit is able to tell his or her story, which was not there earlier. There was a lot of suppression of them telling their story. There were a lot of conspiracy theories, and they felt that somebody else is telling their story. So today they feel that they are able to tell their own story. Once that is recognized and acknowledged, there has to be a justice system in place. There are a lot of cases which are pending. So Kashmiri Pandit thing has to be located in the larger couple of narratives which are there, which are very competitive narratives. In this whole statehood and 370 and the politics that is going on, how do Kashmiri Pandits return? So first I'm saying their story has to be acknowledged. Their narrative has to be built up. And the justice has to be met. There has to be opening of conversations between the local community. And
so I just want to, sorry, just because time is limited, I just want to pick up
an example of how in residential workshops, when we have different kind of young people from very diverse background, they are victims and perpetrators, young people who have been stone pelters or who have served jail. There are also, Kashmiri Pandit young people. So when they share rooms with a Kashmiri Muslim, they listen to each other. So that listening has to happen. The listening hasn't happened in this whole.
But where that's the point, Amitabh. Yeah, that's the point, right? There's almost Amitabh. There's almost a coincidence between politics and if you're a Pandit, you're assumed to have a certain ideology. If you're a Kashmiri Muslim, you're assumed to have a certain ideology, and that's where the narrative becomes competitive.
Yeah, I think to begin with on a facetious note, everyone else in this forum has become an academic. I'm the only one who's trying to speak common sense, which is first of all, I think there needs to be recognition that the displacement of the Kashmiri Pandits was the greatest amongst some great tragedies of Kashmir, and it hurt the Muslims in the valley as much as it hurt the Pandits. You lost the only buffer that you had vis-a-vis in some ways the rest of India. And you can continue to blame Jagmohan or other believe in conspiracy theories. The reality is that if you could not accommodate, strengthen, have ownership for diversity within a small valley, you lost the legitimacy to proclaim empowerment within the larger diversity of India. So the return of Kashmiri Pandits is essential. I've been often accused, as you have, of not speaking up. But for me, that is the benchmark. Now, for all the arguments Ashima has made about stories being told, people listening. The fact is there is probably going to be a critical mass of Kashmiri Pandits who will still want to return to Kashmir despite Ajay Pandita. Now, Sandeep actually is located in the area around Pulwama, Shupian, where there are a number of townships being created for Pandits in Hal, in Mesu, in Mutton. So if that demonstrates one part of the Indian state, I think civil society, the onus is really on people like Tanveer as well, enlightened young men who have a heritage of cohabitation and a great deal of empathy with the Kashmiri Pandits, people like him to reach out to the Kashmir. Instead of blame game, everything has to flow together if we have to build a new Kashmir and to tap that middle ground.
But Amitabh, just to say something very commonsensical, nobody is going to go back into an environment where there are perennial lockdowns, where the internet doesn't work and where you don't feel safe. So unless we can build a valley that is as close to everybody else's idea of normal, right, then only then I think are most people, especially the second generation, third generation of Pandits who are used to a different kind of life, do you really see your friends going back and living in Srinagar or in the valley?
Obviously, you have to incentivize, and Sandeep is the best person to answer because people who have been given government jobs are living there. They might seek a transfer to Jammu at the earliest. But Sandeep, how many families live in the Anantnag, Pulwama, Shupian area at this moment? There would be a couple of thousand, I would imagine, at least, Kashmiri Pandit?
Yes.
Yeah,
So, I mean, you incentivize. It's not easy. But
it's not easy.
To capture the middle ground, this is the only way to go about it.
Okay, I want to bring in Maya and Tanveer. There's a question from Nishant Agarwal. How do you measure radicalization when the masses are locked up? How can you psychologically understand mindsets that may have been radicalized? And then you have Gibran Ahmed Khan, the rule of law should mean equal opportunities, but by putting individuals in unlawful lockdowns, aren't we just delaying the inevitable, which is an outpouring of resentment towards the state? And we've got a bunch of questions, but I'm going to move on. Maya, the media's role in this, we just don't talk about it often enough. We're sitting here very reasonably talking about nuance and complexity and middle ground. This would not find space on a primetime television show.
Well, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. One of the things that, we talk about is the role of the narrative and the creation of that narrative. I saw some of the questions coming in even to this discussion, and the idea that there is the creation of a perception, an anti-minority perception in the rest of the country. There is a perception that this government essentially made a decision on Kashmir last year and forgot about it. For the last 1 year, there's been really no political movement, no outreach. Why is none of this reflected in the media? Today we're seeing TV screens sort of lit up with the spectacle of what we're seeing at Ayodhya. You want to ask, what is actually warranting and driving news coverage today? I mean, is it what is an important story? Is it a celebrity, as we've seen play out in the last couple of weeks with a Bollywood actor's suicide, unfortunate as that was? What is the priority? Is it not a priority to ensure that the government actually is held accountable if they've said they're going to do ABC things with Kashmir in the last 1 year? What is the process towards that? The media has not enough taken up the issue of the political detentions in Jammu and Kashmir. Rather, they kind of played to this gallery. You called it muscular nationalism, but this gallery that says that the mainstream political parties in Jammu and Kashmir, the National Conference, the PDP, or whoever new politicians there are, they've been soft separatists, or they've not really had enough of a vote bank and enough of a voice inside the valley. Even the mainstream, even the ordinary civil society space in Kashmir is relieved that they're out of the scene. All those things may or may not be true, but is it the role of the media to kind of pander to that, or say, just what is the charge against these individuals? Why are they in detention? If we're talking about rule of law, then upholding rule of law and implementing rule of law is also incumbent on the government. It is not only incumbent on the citizenry of the country to ensure that they are not violating rule of law. The government is also accountable to maintain that rule of law. And these questions, Barkha, are only being asked by us who work now in the independent space. You go up there and you do your shows, or I may do a report here and there, or I've met everybody on this panel. As a journalist as well, Sandeep, I came to your office last year. I remember in Shopee, and the questions that need to be asked, they need not be reductionist. They need not be binary.
Yeah.
You're right. That nuance is gone. I mean, it's gone from the media screens because we feel that's what's feeding the TRPs, and for whatever reason, the perception is, the government will be off our back if we kind of, speak this language.
Yeah.
I don't know where we're headed. It's a different conversation and a whole larger debate to be had about where the journalism business is today.
Yes. That is a whole different conversation. But to add to it, the mainstream media's polarity is actually mirrored also by social media polarity. The Kashmiris have a right wing of their own, and it literally brooks no criticism. It also has a very strident politics, and that's what happens. People get crushed between these two narratives. Tanveer, I want you to address something I think you haven't opened up enough about your detention, the detention of others like yourself. What was that?
I think what was that like is the question Barkha asked me.
I think I couldn't hear the question. What?
She wanted you to talk about your own detention and what that was like.
It was it was really hurting. I mean, I wrote an article on this, how humiliating it was for all of us. I mean, and they were not just normal politicians like Sajad Lone, who has been very close to Prime Minister Modi, then politicians like Shah Faisal, who left his IAS job and came. Then I'll say a couple of politicians, for example, an MLA from Gandarbal, whose father was a minister and he was killed by militants, then an MLA from Tral. I mean, these were the people who we all were put in the Centaur sub-jail. And it was so humiliating to see that we were the ones who were taking the flag of the country everywhere, and suddenly we are the ones. I mean, we are, in any case, people of Kashmir would accuse us of being pro-Indian and traitors in that sense. Now then, after we were arrested, now even the country feels that we are anti-national and traitors. So we are neither here or neither there. We really don't. We are like orphans. And this is the most humiliating thing that can happen to any politician. I mean, I'll give you just I know there are bigger issues, but I mean, my 3-year-old kid was frisked. My mother was made to walk a kilometer even though she had an arthritis. I mean, these were some of the things that they would kind of do to us to humiliate us, and this was really saddening. Like I said, there is a lot of hurt and betrayal, not only in us, but I think amongst the larger population of Kashmir. And unfortunately, while we talk about the whole concept of law, I mean, one thing is very important, that the law was not upheld while abrogating the Article 370. I mean, you cannot replace the Constituent Assembly with a state assembly. Then you cannot replace the state assembly with a governor, and you cannot replace a governor with a nominee from the president. Now you are saying that you got a consent from a nominee of a president. I mean, if you're talking about rule of law, it should be for the whole country, not only when it comes to Kashmir. There is a different yardstick, and when it's about
can I ask you something, Tanveer? Tanveer, you've movingly spoken about your own personal experience. Do you think that this is a moment that will bring all mainstream parties together? There was the Gupka resolution that had been signed at Farooq Abdullah's house. Will they see something extraordinary as the NC, the PDP, the People's Conference, Shah Faisal's party? Will this see a merging of the mainstream onto one side, one platform, or is that because of this shared experience of the detentions?
I hope it does, Barkha. I mean, I'll tell you, while we were in the centaur, and initially we were not able to talk to each other, but as soon as we started discussing issues, I think the Gupkar declaration was something that everybody felt could be something that could be looked up to all in years to come. And even for that, today Dr. Farooq Abdullah had called a meeting at his place to discuss Gupkar declaration. Unfortunately, there were huge guards outside his homes, and all the people who were a part of that Gupkar declaration were arrested, were house arrested. So, I mean, like I said, you can easily, BJP can roam around and talk about politics, but when it comes to the mainstream, the other mainstream, we are not able to move around. We are not able to do anything. But yes, I wish all the political parties from different spectrum, from different parties, come together, and that is how you will move ahead. Otherwise, it's a stalemate, and I think the day is not far when people in Delhi will think that this was the biggest mistake or the biggest blunder they did last year on August.
Okay, so very different set of views if you juxtapose Sandeep Chaudhary on the one hand, Tanveer on the other, Amitabh somewhere in the middle. I have about a few minutes left, so I'm going to take last comments. Amitabh, I'll start with you. Where do we go from here?
I think, as I said, there is a need for a collective introspection. What has happened. I don't think you can wish that away. But at the center, you need to have introspection about how, while you have had the constitutional integration, the challenge of emotional integration remains. And that includes the emotional integration, in a sense, the emotional empowerment of the Kashmiri Pandits, as well as the Kashmiri Muslims, as well as the concerns that the Hindus in Jammu have about domicile. Now, the only people who still have a sense of a great God of evil, which is characteristic of their life, is the people in Leh, who seem to have almost unanimously approved this. So collective introspection, and to then move ahead and get people to commit to the promises that were made, including on Article 370, to ensure that when elections are held, they're held on the basis of real constituencies rather than gerrymandered constituencies. And introspection only because Tanveer is here, and I don't these days get a chance to interact with mainstream politicians since they're in house arrest or in jail, but I think they need to introspect. If God forbid, and God forbid because Tanveer is such a great friend, if he had been put in jail for the next 5 years, who would have grieved for him? Realistically, a few friends apart, neither the constituency in Kashmir nor the constituency in Delhi. That's a question you need to ask yourself. When Sheikh Abdullah was arrested, you had people like Jayaprakash Narayan and Mridula Sarabhai and people in parliament reaching out and talking about it. And over a sustained period, because he was in incarceration for 10 years. But today, where is the moral high ground that the mainstream should occupy in any situation like the one that operates in Jammu?
Tanveer, do you want to briefly just take that? I have to start.
Yeah, just one question. I'm to a large extent I agree to Amitabh what he's saying, but coming back to Kashmir, I mean, for example, the domicile law. What was the urgency in Kashmir? I mean, you're not doing it in Ladakh. Why the urgency here? So let not look at Kashmir through a militarily or an administratively. It has to be a political thing. Let politicians decide about the domicile law, about anything. I mean, and for that, I think the process has to start somewhere. And I think for that, the government of India needs to start that process as soon as possible.
30 seconds. With due respect again to Sandeep Chaudhary, I think for the average Kashmiri and for the rest of India, it's put away the myth that governors rule or rule by bureaucrats is better. I mean, notwithstanding all the various good things that might have happened, but there was this myth that the Jagmohan during his first period, governor had a kind of magic wand by which he was able to deliver. Bureaucrats have a place in society. They're part of the constitution, but they're not the ones who are supposed to govern. They're instruments of governance.
Okay.
Democratic leaders like Tanveer Sadiq and others of his ilk need to make the decisions which are going to impact on the lives of people in the short, medium, and long term.
Ashima, thank you, Amitabh. Ashima, your prescription going forward, you spoke about the need to engage with people. Who has to start? Who starts that? Who's going to start that?
So, yeah, like I want to add on to what you are saying about the prescription, about future. See, my organization and the work that I've been doing, we did it in the midst of a live conflict, bringing adversaries together. The work is so crucial to listen, to heal, and to move on from there as a collective, as a common understanding of what's happening around us. So that is really, really crucial. I want to tell you that when Abrogation 370 happened, and this is the work that I've been doing with young people from Jammu, Kashmir, Ladakh, with very, very diverse experiences of the conflict, whether they are victims of terrorism or state brutality or, many other kinds of narratives that they ascribe to. So we're bringing them together, taking them together by listening to each other, healing and all. We survived 370 as an organization, as a group. So it only tells me that this works. This works. The relationships, the human relationships are so crucial in a conflict. And we don't really talk about that. We talk about, it's important, political relationships, political institutions and other institutions and the entire polity we need to look at. But we were working in the midst of all these binaries. And we survived. We survived because we were listening to each other. So that model has to be translated into political consciousness.
I think that's a really important point. The capacity to have a conversation is underestimated in conflict zones, and it's a very, very important point to make. I have to close. I'll give Sandeep Chaudhary the last word. Sandeep, Amitabh Mattu is reminding you again and again that when you talk about good governance, that governance in the end has to be led by elected representatives, not to take away from the fine work of bureaucracies, of men and women in uniform. When can that process begin again? Because without that, we can't really talk about participative democracy or emotional or even political integration in the genuine sense of the word.
In my limited experience, the biggest hurdle towards any kind of positive activity in Valley is terrorism. Exactly 30 years ago, my home state Punjab was going through the worst phase of terrorism there. 30 years later, neither the politicians nor the people like me can even imagine the terrorism used to exist in this place. In the same manner, Kashmir Valley, first of all, has to get rid of this scourge of terrorism. It will open so many windows. Political activity is obviously the primary window in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep. Amitabh, Tanveer and Ashima and Maya for making this conversation possible. I think 2 or 3 things as we summarize in this polarized environment, conversations like this are more critical than ever before. Most people actually do not find themselves in this side or that side. They find themselves squarely in the middle. They recognize that there are shades, multiple shades of truth in as complex a situation as Jammu and Kashmir. Amitabh Mattu has reminded us that it is no point theorizing over why, what, when, how of Article 370. It's done. This government is done with 370. It's highly unlikely that we are going to see a restoration of Article 370. The question that now remains before us is what sort of politics is able to emerge from the debris of 370. And the mainstream parties, while getting a lot of support from people like us, did not get support from the street. So they need to pause and ask themselves what language of politics will get them connected to the people. Maya has brought home the perils of a polarized media, and Sandeep Chaudhary himself serving in perhaps one of the most volatile regions, the South Kashmir region, once a militant hotbed, gives us the good piece of news that at the moment, there is no evidence to show any surge in local militancy. In fact, those numbers are down. So when we talk about 5th of August, where a temple building has begun, we also talk, whether from Ayodhya to Kashmir, about rebuilding faith in the truest sense of the word, rebuilding trust. And I think that's what our energies have to be spent on. Thank you so much, ORF, and all our participants and all our audience for taking part in this conversation. Thank you very much. Back to you, Maya.